Thank you. My name is David Krebs. I'm a graduate student at Gallatin studying the politics of gender and sexual identity in Africa. And more specifically, I'm interested in sexual minorities in Ghana and issues of gender and sexual performance and also international activism. This summer I worked with the Human Rights Advocacy Center in the capital Accra, where I worked as a LGBT rights intern within the projects division. But before I begin, I wanted to make a few acknowledgements. First, the Global Human Rights Fellowship and the Advisory Council. I think the opportunity to conduct field work abroad is incredibly invaluable, especially as many of us are continuing on to PhD or master's programs. I'd like to thank Vasuki and Pat for their support throughout this experience, my independent advisor, Awam, and my academic advisor, Rosalind, who puts up with me for some reason, and of course the Human Rights Advocacy Center. All right, I wanted to give you this photo of Oxford Street, which cuts through one of the main neighborhoods in Accra, Osu. This is where I worked and lived, and I think there's a lot that we can glean from this image, mostly that it's a very urban context in which I was living, and although I had the opportunity to travel across the country, most of my experience was located here in this neighborhood. And so much of my understanding of sexual politics in Ghana can't really be generalized across the entire country, and certainly not to broader African contexts. So first, a little bit about the Human Rights Advocacy Center. HRAC is a not-for-profit, independent, and nonpartisan research organization which was set up to advance the human rights for citizens of Ghana. And it serves two key purposes. The first is the Human Rights Clinic, which was set up to provide free legal aid to the public and serves as a walk-in center for survivors of human rights abuses. However, one of the problems is that many people in Ghana don't know necessarily what their human rights are, nor when or if their rights have been violated. And second is the Pro Bono Lawyers Network, which was established in 2010. And this provides free legal assistance to vulnerable Ghanaians and communities whose rights to access to justice might be limited by financial obstacles such as legal fees. And its primary objective was to provide free legal representation to any survivors of human rights abuses and also victims of human rights abuse. So the main crux of the organization was a legal background, which is not necessarily where I'm coming from. So although much of my work was administrative and clerical, I also had a lot of unique opportunities, such as attending the country's first gay pride event, which was wonderful, complex, and also problematic for reasons we can discuss later. But one of the ideas is that one of the arguments against homosexuality is that it's, quote, un-African. So it doesn't necessarily look good that this massive government agency that represents Westernization is the one that's initiating gay pride. I wanted to give a little bit of background for the context for where HRAC is operating from. And to begin, I'll begin with the question of, is homosexuality illegal in Ghana? And the answer is no, but there's a little asterisk next to that. So although the Constitution of Ghana guarantees the protection for all citizens, regardless of race, age, gender, religion, there's no mention of sexual orientation. However, we can glean from a few of the articles, namely 17 and 18, which state that all citizens are equal before the law, and also that Ghanaians have the right to privacy. And these two provisions should, in theory, be used to protect LGBT persons. However, the Criminal Offense Act in Ghana, which was established in 1960, bans homosexual activity and demonstrates an example of institutionalized discrimination. Specifically, Section 104(2) of the reference states, "Whoever is guilty of unnatural carnal knowledge of any person with or without their consent is guilty of either first-degree felony or a misdemeanor." And this provision represents archaic British sodomy laws, which were meant to criminalize sodomy and should, in theory, be applicable to both heterosexual and homosexual couples. However, the inherently vague nature of what unnatural carnal knowledge is has allowed judicial courts to interpret it as a means to prosecute mainly homosexual and LGBT persons. And then I threw the Pew Research Global Attitudes Project up there, which was conducted in 2013 and asked the question of, should homosexuality be accepted in society? And although these surveys are wrought with problems and politics behind the way we ask questions, it's important to know that 3% of Ghanaians say yes, implying that 97% with a margin of error say no. And that number is important because it puts Ghana between Uganda and Nigeria, which are two countries that have been in the news recently for their extreme levels of homophobia. So there's a paradox going on here where Ghana has higher levels of homophobia than, say, Uganda, and yet there's no international discourse. And then I wanted to briefly discuss media in Ghana, which often has inflammatory and dishonest articles such as homosexuality, a worldwide moral breakdown, homosexuality is deviant behavior, and we support the fight against homosexuality. And so some of these articles warn people against homosexuality, that it represents the destruction of Ghanaian values and culture, while others urge society to ignore human rights discourse in order to fight against homosexuality and, quote, save Ghana. In regards to what I had to learn and unlearn, I think it's important to note that I arrived in Ghana with a certain set of expectations of what I thought, what I'll call the queer scene would look like. And much of this was based on previous experience of living and working in East Africa, which offered me the opportunity to travel around the Great Lakes region and meet with LGBT activists in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and also Rwanda. And I projected some of my experiences onto what I thought my experience would be in Accra. And as a result, the working title for my thesis proposal and what would come to be my thesis was Ghana's Subaltern, which was a reference to the invisible status of men and women who are socially, politically, and sometimes geographically outside of the hegemonic power structures of Ghana. And although it took me some time working and talking with LGBT activists in Ghana, going to cafes, bars, and clubs, and eventually becoming imbricated within the LGBT community, as I would like to think I was, I was surprised by how visible the queer scene was. And as in the opposite of that was how illegible it was to people outside the community. So Ghana Subaltern was problematic because first, it placed the climate of sexual minorities within a binary of two distinct yet interconnected narratives, one that demonstrated the discourse of queer African sexuality, one being that homosexuality is un-African, and the other that treats Africa as a site of obsessive homophobia. So in return, renaming my thesis proposal, Reimagining Ghana Subaltern, I think, speaks to the more complex political, social climate facing minorities in Ghana. And the question of whether or not an international human rights discourse is appropriate for LGBT rights in Ghana, I find this quote from a Ugandan activist to be particularly astute and worth quoting in length. Our struggle must move away from the victimization narrative and begin to focus on positive stories. It doesn't help us when foreign journalists, bloggers, and allies represent our struggle as desperate. While the desperate narrative puts us in the international spotlight and does hold our leaders accountable, it also pits us against our fellow nationals. A balance of both narratives will bring the change we all need. And that quote is especially important when considering that in 2011, Ghana was in the international spotlight when the British government and David Cameron threatened to withhold foreign aid on both Ghana and also countries that persecute homosexuals unless they stop the punishment of sexual minorities. And while the intent may well be to uphold the rights of sexual minorities on the continent, cutting aid disregards LGBT and broader social justice movements. And donor sanctions may in fact be one way of seeking to improve the human rights situation in a country, but it does not necessarily result in the improved protection of the rights of sexual minorities. And donor sanctions are by nature very coercive, and they reinforce disproportionate power relations between donor countries and recipients. I'll finish off with what's next. One of the great advantages of applying for this fellowship has been learning how to apply for fellowships in the future. So first, I hope to attend as a GRI member or a graduate research initiative to spend time in London next semester at the School of Oriental and Africana Studies, which is part of the University of London and houses an archive that represents over 250 years of relations between England and Ghana, and also its colonies. And I'd love to return to Ghana to conduct additional field research for my thesis. Thank you.